The Morphology of Steve. In 2002, the Intelligent Design Promoting Discovery Institute published yet another creationist list of scientists claiming that evolution has no scientific merit. A scientific dissent from Darwinism was signed by 100 scientists. Of course, this is just dumb. You don't decide science by petition. If evolution is a problem field in science, there will be scientists who will be examining the claims, will be testing whether they are valid or not. They will convince their colleagues, and eventually scientists will give up on evolution. But we certainly aren't going to do it just because 100 scientists signed a petition. But these kinds of petitions are very effective with the general public, because the general public finds it very persuasive. 100 scientists? I don't know 100 scientists. That's very impressive. Well, yes, I do know 100 scientists. Most members of the general public would be impressed by it. Now, I used to work at the National Center for Science Education, which deals with evolution and climate change and trying to keep these subjects in the public schools against a lot of opposition. And we were inundated by people who wanted NCSE to organize a petition of tens of thousands, nay, hundreds of thousands of scientists who would counter the Discovery Institute's petition. But if it was dumb to have a petition criticizing evolution, it was equally dumb to have a petition supporting evolution. So we demurred. One of our activists in Ohio, a man by the name of Steve Rissing, scientist, harumphed 100 scientists. I could get more than 100 scientists named Steve. An ideal was born. We drafted a generic statement in support of evolution and started quietly collecting names of scientists named Steve, and shortly had 200 scientists named Steve attesting to this generic pro-evolution statement. All of the Steves had PhDs in the natural sciences or the social sciences. We took Steve's, Stephanie's, Esteban's, Etienne's, Steve and cognates for Steve were acceptable. Project Steve has continued giving, and every year it has grown in number. We had a special award for the 1,000th Steve. The coveted Thumbless Panda Award, which was bestowed in 2009 to the distinguished head of the Tulane University Botanical Garden, Steve Darwin. I did not make that up. I did not make that up. And he might have actually been the 102nd or 3rd, but he was the Kilo Steve. And on the NCSE website, the Steve-O-meter stands at 1,432 as of September 2018. Now, to be fair, the Discovery Institute's dissent from Darwinism claimed in late 2016 to have over 900 members. But they didn't indicate how many Steves there are, and there are no Stephanies whatsoever. The only Steve on the original Discovery Institute list of 100 scientists is the Discovery Institute's own Steve Meyer. Highly refined multivariate analysis demonstrates that there is a 1% Steves in the DI list of scientists. This actually, if you did not know, reflects the percentage of Steves in the general public. Stephanies and Steves together, Steve and cognates, are approximately 1% of names of Americans, making our 1,432 Steves equivalent to 143,000 scientists supporting evolution. Project Steve generated a great deal of publicity, and every time there's an article or a podcast mentioning Project Steve, more Steves clamor to be added to the list. Oops. website. Project Steve has also inspired a hit song, the Steve Song, written by a couple of Australian journalists in honor of the project, not to be confused with a similar sounding song by a group of Brits.
Steve, 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 Steve. We're scientific Steves, the skeptics and the lead. The Bible text just concrete facts, we know, don't just believe. The Bible's just naive, face threatens to deceive. We cross our heart and quote Descartes, we're scientific Steves. We're evolved, we're created. We're evolved, we're evolved.
Must have settled Australia, I'm not sure. But of course, Bay Area Skeptics is here tonight to talk about science, and Project Steve provides a previously unknown opportunity to test a series of biological hypotheses regarding large-bodied mammals, all of whom happen to be named Steve, Stephanie, or cognates. The scientists at NCSE performed this analysis for the very best of reasons. We had data. Now, you may have noticed that Steves have demonstrated a particular superiority in science and scholarship in general. I call to your attention that Steve Jones, Stephen Rose, Stephen Hawking, and Stephen Pinker are all NCSE Steves. In fact, I will tell you a little bit later. In order to obtain body-size estimates of Steves and Stephanies, we offered free t-shirts to the Project Steve participants, which cleverly allowed us to explore the morphology of Steve. We had to have the geographic location of the scientist in order to mail them the t-shirts, and we were able to infer the gender of the scientist by assuming that nobody would name their son Stephanie. With 3 data points, you can do a remarkable amount of analysis, and we did so. We decided to explore the morphology of Steve when our sample exceeded 420 individuals, which also happened to be the time when Deputy Director Glenn Branch was sitting at his desk typing in the shirt size and address of the latest Steve to come in from some newspaper article, and he commented, "I'm becoming an expert on the morphology of Steve." An idea was born, a minimal publishable unit, an MPU. Before we explored Steve morphology, we looked at the distribution of Steves in our sample regarding the spelling of the name and found a very surprising result. Both Stephen and Steve were present in our sample at the exact same percentage, 34%. This reifies the concept of the even Steven. When we plotted Steves by zip codes, we found a non-random distribution of Steves. The Mid-American Steve deficit has not, to our knowledge, been reported previously. We encourage Steves from the east and the west coasts to please move inland to make up for the paucity of Stevitude in the central states, particularly Iowa and the Dakotas. We also analyzed our distribution of Steves by country, comparing American domestic Steves with foreign or wild Steves. Most of the sample were indeed from the United States, with most of the wild Steves coming from Great Britain, Canada, Australia, Germany, and the combined Israel, Netherlands, and South Africa collected here as random little countries. We were astonished to discover a basic island biogeographical principle applied to the morphology of Steves as well. Island Steves, like other large-bodied mammals, are smaller than mainland Steves. No one has ever described island dwarfism Steves before. This was truly a breakthrough. As a physical anthropologist, I was of course interested in sexual dimorphism of Steves and Stephanie's. Humans are highly sexually dimorphic. It is even possible to encounter human beings whose degree of sexual dimorphism is fully 3 standard deviations beyond the mean. So of course we wanted to investigate sexual dimorphism among Steves. To our amazement, we found that the Steve clade sexual dimorphism is reversed. Stephanies are larger than Steves in our sample, once again highlighting the extraordinariness of Steves. There were 5 Stephanies, one of them ordered an extra large. Sure, but you know. One of the most important analyses was our consideration of clinal variation in the morphology of Steve. The principle of Bergmann's rule notes that larger-bodied populations of warm-blooded mammals live at higher latitudes with smaller, this is actually real stuff, and smaller-bodied mammals live closer to the equator, as shown by this Arctic wolf and a wolf from India. These 2 rules also illustrate Allen's rule, which says that, on average, the limb length and extremity length in general, things like noses and ears as well as limbs, of warm-blooded mammals within a species are longer the closer you get to the equator. You get sort of stubby and stockiness further away from the equator at higher latitudes. Unfortunately, shirt size tells you nothing about limb dimensions, so we could not explore Allen's rule in our study, but we could estimate body mass. Bergmann's rule reflects the law of squares and cubes. This again is some real science as opposed to most everything else, in that the mass of an individual or anything expands as the square of the linear dimension, whereas the surface area expands as the cube. The other way around. Sorry, I knew that was wrong when I was saying it. I used to teach this actually, but that was 40 years ago, but it was good. Thus, the larger the organism, the proportionately less surface area it has, so it's more efficient in terms of coal. Having a lot of surface area, like with Allen's rule, is a really good way to dissipate heat, so you find those kinds of morphological structures closer to the equator. Bulk is adaptive in cold environments. Bergmann's rule would predict that larger-bodied Steves live in higher latitudes with smaller Steves living closer to the equator. But when we first plotted the data, we did not find this result. Undaunted, we reanalyzed the data by longitude, in case there was an east-west or an west-east climb, even though such a relationship would be meaningless regarding the adaptation of warm-blooded animals. But we found that there was no clinal variation here either. However, with a small amount of statistical manipulation involving constraining the line to the 0 point, we successfully were able to demonstrate that Bergmann's rule does in fact apply to Steves. Pay no attention to that negative R squared behind the scene. These results were published in the Annals of Improbable Results, the research, July-August 2004, available online at www.improbable.com. And I'd like to thank my co-authors, Nicholas Motsky, Glenn Branch, Stephen Avedon, Stephen Addison, Stephen Adler, Stephen Alley with 1 L, Stephen Alley with 2 L's, Stephen Altscher, and the other 420 co-authors, including 2 Nobel laureates and Stephen Hawking. And do visit my new colleagues at NCSE for much more information on real science. Thank you very much.